What are AI agents and how are they different than large language models or chat models? What does RAG or retrieval augmented generation have to do with any of this? What is tool use? These are the kind of things that I'm going to dive into here. My name is Shay Brown. I'm the CEO of a company that audits algorithms for bias, effectiveness, ethical risk. I'm also was a professor of astrophysics. And now I run a community working on learning and exploring these topics in the era of AI. So I've done a few videos on this, introducing some of the basic concepts of large language models and how they work. In particular, sort of going through the basics of how to sort of the autoregressive transformer decoders work. All that is basically is to say that how do we go from this basic machine, which is a model, a bunch of matrix multiplications. I have some text, which is my prompt. I put it into that, and I'm going to get out more text. Fundamentally, what this model is actually doing is really just predicting the next token. You sort of put some machinery around this, some code, which is going to take this model, this basic large language model, and allow you to generate more text. And because of some of the ways in which it's trained, it's going to sort of generate more and more words. And those words are the kind that you want from a nice, helpful chat model. So this is autoregressive text generation. I talked about supervised fine tuning. I also talked about the idea of how if you have sort of this model, this chat model now, which will produce text, I just have sort of a fixed context window where I can stick tokens in. So words, I can only fit so many words in here. And this is what I have to work with in order to get a sensible response. And so we talked a little bit about retrieval augmented generation, where it can go and fetch chunks of text from a vector database and stick those into the context. And when it sticks it into these chunks of text into the context, it can learn in context learning. It can kind of learn from these chunks of text and give you better results. But still, at the end of the day, how is that different than agents? What is an agent and how is it different than this sort of standard? This standard picture of I have text, I feed it into this chat model, and I get text out. And I might have, of course, drawn from other sources of information, like documents or the web, but still I get text in and text out. That is my chat model, which has some extra retrieval augmented generation tacked on top of it. How is that different than an AI agent? Because agents are something that we've been hearing a lot about recently. And what is different about it? Well, the basic idea, I can use a couple of different diagrams. This is a nice diagram, which comes from a paper, Cognitive Architectures for Language Agents. You can see the authors here. And I grabbed this just because I like the diagram. The paper is actually quite good as well, but I just wanted to use these diagrams to illustrate. So the basic large language model is, as you see here, I put some input in, I get some input out. Now you can turn this into sort of a simple agent. What is the difference between, what makes it an agent? And the real difference here is that it can take some sort of action. It can somehow interact with the outside environment. So in a very simple sense, the retrieval augmented generation that I talked about last video, and I can put the link to that somewhere here, is a type of agent in the sense that it can interact with the outside world. And that interaction is simply to get more information and put it into the context of this large language model and it's still giving you a textual output, but it's informed by outside information, whether that's a PDF or a search, the information from the web. So that is also a type of agent, but there's a lot more that you can do. And in fact, agents can typically take lots of different actions. And so here's a nice example where perhaps I have a large language model, and the way I've configured it is that instead of just giving me a text out, what it's going to do is it's going to feed that text. So I might have tacked on a little extra module here, meaning like a piece of code that says take the output and configure it in such a way that I can make a post to my link. So in this case, how is that going to work? I'm going to have to write this code to specifically configure the output and use, let's say, an API, a LinkedIn API that is going to allow me to post automatically. And so I'll take that. So the text is coming out of this large language model or chat model, and it's going to configure it in such a way that I can make this post. Now, this is, a different kind of agentic behavior than we saw before, where I'm still getting text out. Now I'm doing something with this text. And if we go back to sort of one of the foundational textbooks, this is Norvig's A Modern Approach. What's the actual name of the book? Yeah, I'm forgetting now. But it's the machine learning, or the AI book rather, that almost everybody learns from in the beginning. They talk about agents here, and they have this idea that there are sort of agents are going to have these sensors. It's got this way of observing the environment. And then it's also going to have actuators, some way of affecting the environment or interacting and changing its environment. And the details of what's inside here can vary from one agent to another agent. The way it can do it, it can be very simple rules. It can have all sorts of different ways of configuring that. But the basic idea is that it can get information from its environment. And that could be, in some sense, just you. Maybe you're just giving it information, and then it's going to do things. Or it might be gathering information like retrieval augmented generation, and then it's going to be able to execute different actions. And another nice way of looking at this is a recent paper on agents, or white paper on agents from Google, where they break down the basic architecture of these, where I have the agent in the blue box here, and it has a sort of a model, which is the central sort of brain of the agent. And then there's code, which is going to orchestrate how you're going to use that model in different ways. And it can access different tools. So you're going to have high level sort of goals and instructions. What is this agent meant to do? And then it can access memory. So it's going to store some information, either long-term, which is normally like a vector store or something like that, and then short-term, which is typically what you put into its context. And then it's going to have some sense of reasoning and planning. And so this is all code which is going to interact with the model, and then it can also interact with the tools. Let me put an X here, because typically the model doesn't immediately interact with the tools. It's going to come through this orchestration layer. And so this orchestration layer is code which is going to say, think about, here's some information, go think about it, come up with maybe a plan. This is how I'm going to store and parse the plan out, and then I'm going to take actions. Some of those actions are going to utilize tools which might give me information. These tools might do things, so that this could be, these are observations, these might be actions, which could actually affect the environment. Sometimes it's just to observe the environment or to get more information. And eventually there's going to be some sort of response that comes out. And that response can come in the form of the final answer. So if the agent is meant to give you some final answer, like write me a report which is going to research this particular topic for me, it might just give me the report as the response. Or there might be cases where in the process here, because of the orchestration that I've done, it might have some stops where in each step, maybe I need to sort of give a check mark that says yes, or an X says don't do that, try something different. So various levels of human control. So the real things that make these agents different than the model, this is the large language model. Or and normally it's autoregressive, so it's really it's like a chat model. But at the very least, it's going to give you more than a single token back. It's going to autoregressively give you multiple tokens back. This is the model. The difference here that makes an agent different than the model is that you are adding on top of it the ability to break things up into planning. You are giving it some memory, either long-term in the sense that it has a database it can interact with. Short-term is just, let's say, retrieval augmented generation. You can draw from its long-term memory and stick it into the model. And it's got some high-level goals and instructions on how it ought to behave, and it has access to tools. And so instead of just being, I give it some text in and then I get some text out, which is fundamentally all that this model can do, I've added on other layers which are going to allow me to have more complex agentic behavior. So this kind of behavior would be considered agentic. And so tool use and sort of iteratively working through some of the steps that are in the orchestration layer. Now, what are the implications of this? In short, this is a more complex system. And so you're making multiple calls to this model, or you potentially could be making multiple calls to this model. And potentially you could have more than one model in here. And so you could have model 1 and model 2, and you might be making multiple calls to different models. And so the complexity increases a lot. And you also have, from a risk-based perspective, you have the ability to affect the outside world in some structured way, but still that offers some uncertainty in how this thing behaves. Okay, so this is all very high level, but what we're going to do next time is we're going to dig into some examples of how this actually works and try to parse out what are the really relevant features here and what makes it really a different kind of subject of inquiry, especially from my perspective of somebody who has to audit these systems.